Okay, Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum, good evening and welcome to this week's City Circle. Today we will be exploring Sufism. A lot of the manifestations of religion we see in the world today are quite prescriptive, they're quite legalistic, they're quite visual in many ways. So often it's all about what you wear, how you look, what you eat. It's a very kind of outwardly show of Islam, and in a sense a form of religion that other people find easy to measure and often in a very strong way judge you by. People like to measure things, quantify things, compare things. However, as a reaction to this more literalistic and legalistic version of Islam, people have either distanced themselves from any form of explicit religiosity, finding it all rather superficial, or they have found Sufism. And it's this take on Islam that we're going to explore today, this version of Islam. Some would argue this original interpretation of Islam. Some would argue the word Islam and Sufism is interchangeable. But the City Circle is not the Sufi circle, so we wish to explore this in an open and honest way. So we don't just want to look at what Sufism is in theory, but we want to understand how it plays out in the real world. So for example, how do Sufi tariqas actually work? How does one become part of a Sufi group under a Sufi sheikh? How does the whole master-student relationships, peer-murid relationship actually work? We know that there is rampant abuse of this system in many parts of the world, like Pakistan and even parts of the UK. How does one make bay'ah to a Sufi master, for example? And how does one challenge the master? Does it encourage critical thinking? How does one withdraw one's bay'ah, withdraw one's oath of allegiance? So there's lots and lots to talk about. We are very privileged to have with us this evening a Sufi master who joins us this evening to explore these themes. Shaikh Kabir Helminski is co-founder and co-director of the Threshold Society, which is a non-profit educational organisation and has been working within the Mevlevi tradition of Sufism for about 30 years alongside his wife. He has developed programs that provide a structure for the practice and study within Sufism and spiritual psychology, and is also a translator of numerous books and volumes of Sufi literature, including many works on Rumi. Shaikh Kabir was officially recognized as a Sheikh of the Mevlevi order of Sufism in 1990. He has lectured at hundreds of institutions, and in 2009 was named as one of the 500 most influential Muslims in the world. He resides with his family in the US, so we're very pleased to have him with us this evening.
Thank you so much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you all for coming. Although this is a lecture hall, and some people are even forced to stand all the way in the back. If you get tired, you could come and sit on the floor here if you're comfortable. Although this is a large lecture hall, I would like us to feel almost as if we're just sitting in a living room together, about to have inquiry about the things that matter to us. We're all searching for truth, searching for how to develop our own souls. My hope is that I can share something with you of my own spiritual journey of nearly 40 years on the path of Sufism. In the email announcing this talk, there's a mention of a dilemma experienced by many Muslims in the West. The dilemma, as our host has said, is between a rigid and dogmatic expression of Islam that doesn't seem to satisfy the spiritual yearning of many people. And on the other hand, a materialistic society that marginalizes or even dismisses the spiritual dimension of life. I haven't come here to address extremism or ignorance, but we need to take some account of the context in which we live. Recently I was watching a television broadcast from one of the more, what I consider progressive and objective news sources, when I realized that 4 out of 5 of the major news stories involved cases of extreme inhumane violence perpetrated in the name of Islam. And not long ago, I was asked to give a plenary talk to a group called United Muslims of America on the subject of the remedy for Islamophobia. We need to recognize and admit that even from the earliest days, the meme of murder and violence to achieve ends has been present among the so-called Muslims. The remedy for Islamophobia, in my opinion, is to so marginalize and anathematize this kind of violence that it becomes inconceivable for it to happen in the name of Islam. The remedy for Islamophobia, the only one I can think of, is to consistently present Islam as a rigorous, compassionate force for justice, generosity, magnanimity, and peace. Not long ago, about a year ago, I had the occasion to meet a man who's called the Gandhi of Syria. And he's given his life to the practice of nonviolence, and he suffered a lot through it. And I asked him, how is it that we know that in our own tradition we have a justification for fighting and war in the name of certain rights? How do you promote this idea of nonviolence in the framework of Islam? And his answer was simple. He said, given the means that we have of destruction and violence today, including the nuclear threat, war should be inconceivable to us in the name of Islam. Islam was once able, at the time of the Prophet, at the time of the first revelation, to free the imagination of people, to unleash creativity, to unify human communities, and above all, inspire people with the divine message. How is it possible that one of the highest truths ever revealed to humanity should become mere indoctrination, or worse yet, a form of mind control? How is it possible that a message of peace and reconciliation should become a weapon in the hands of the intolerant and power-hungry? How is it possible that an expression of pure cosmic intelligence should become the subject for rote learning and rigid, formulaic thinking? Members of every true religion should ask themselves this question, especially Muslims, especially us. But now we're at the turning of a new cycle, the collapse of a system based in human egoism and exploitation. Humanity, and indeed all of planetary life, is hanging in the balance. Given the challenges humanity faces, are Muslims going to be a part of the solution or part of the problem? A respected French author, Eric Geoffroy, wrote a book some years ago called Islam Will Be Spiritual or It Will Not Be. When will our religious leaders and clerics become unifiers of the fractious children of Adam? When will they honor the feminine and give women an equal voice? When will they get beyond their petty preoccupation with dress codes and external behaviors and shift their focus from fear, sin, and punishment to awakening, consciousness, and love? I can only speak for myself, but I've come to believe that too much of what passes for Islam today are man-made rules, cultural distortions, and dogmatic thinking, and that these are contrary to the Prophet's real sunnah, contrary to the broad path, the true Sharia that leads to human well-being. Ibn Abbas related that the Prophet ﷺ was asked, of all religions, which is the most beloved to Allah? He responded, the simple Hanafiya one. Hanafiya, you probably know the term, but it refers to that primordial monotheism, that recognition that everything important depends on making the divine the center of our lives. My own lineage comes through Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, and I'd like to share a story found in his discourses. It's about Bayezid Bistami. When Bayezid was a child, his father took him to school to learn jurisprudence. When brought before the teacher, he asked, "Is this the jurisprudence of God?" "This is the jurisprudence of Abu Hanifa," they said. "I want the jurisprudence of God." When taken before the grammar teacher, he asked, "Is this God's grammar?" "This is Siboye's grammar," the teacher said. "I don't want it," he replied. Everywhere he was taken, he said the same thing. Unable to do anything with him, his father left him alone. Still following his quest, Bayezid Bistami later came to Baghdad. As soon as he saw Hazrati Junayd, he cried out, "This is God's jurisprudence." And how should a lamb not recognize its mother, having been nourished on her milk? Bayezid was born of intellect and discernment. So let the external form go. We have a choice among different expressions of Islam. In one conception, the primary issues are sin and punishment, haram and halal. Doing good is following the commandments of Allah, focusing on the strictly correct performance of outer rituals and the requirements of dress and outer appearance. One does good in expectation of being rewarded. One avoids what is haram to escape punishment. The perfect way of life is following the Sharia, which was defined by the ulama a few centuries after the Prophet lived, and following the Prophet's sunnah, which is understood to be the imitation of his exact outer behavior and conduct. Now, I realize and respect the scrupulosity with which many native-born Muslims have been raised, to where you truly don't want to break God's law or to make a mistake regarding virtue, morals. We respect that, we understand that. But this body of knowledge and this rationale that I've just described, which is quite logical, and it all follows a certain logic, it makes sense. You've come into the world, you're going to live, you're going to die. God has made his commandments known to you. You will follow them in the way you're told, or you will be punished. It all makes it has a logic, it has a syntax of its own. Along with it goes that this is a body of knowledge. This body of knowledge is only properly known and interpreted by those who have received an institutional Islamic education. All possible questions have been asked and answered. The gates of ijtihad are closed. And those who go to Jannah will be primarily those Muslims who lived within this system. This conception logically follows from the premises on which it is established. It forms the unconscious syntax of a religion that proclaims itself as the only correct interpretation of Islam. But let us reflect on the following ayats. Say, have you ever considered all the means of sustenance which God has bestowed upon you from on high, and which you thereupon divide into things forbidden and things lawful? Say, has God given you permission, or do you perchance attribute your own guesswork to God? But what will they think, they who attribute their own lying inventions to God on the day of resurrection? Behold, God is indeed limitless in his bounty unto human beings, but most of them are ungrateful. From Surah Jonah, ayats 59 to 60. One conception of religion sees our relationship with the divine primarily in legalistic terms, a life in which we please God by correctly performing rituals and behaviors, living in a world in which haram and halal has proliferated far beyond the simple prescriptions of the Holy Quran. And the great Rabbi Abraham Heschel described the sclerosis of religion, in which, quote, faith is completely replaced by creed, true worship by discipline, love by habit. When the crisis of today is ignored because of the splendor of the past, when faith becomes an heirloom rather than a living fountain, when religion speaks only in the name of authority rather than with the voice of compassion. But there is another approach, one with a very different syntax, the most compelling of which could be summarized by the following two hadith qudsis. One applying to the experiences related to spiritual perception and inner knowing. I was a hidden treasure, and I longed to be known, so I created the universes, seen and unseen, in order that my treasure of generosity and loving kindness would be known. The second hadith qudsi. Whosoever knows himself knows his sustainer. So among certain people within the history of Islamic civilization, concepts like this, concept that the foremost attribute of reality is the rahmah, the mercy, and that the purpose of our lives is to discover and perceive and experience the true dimensions of God's beauty and generosity. Granted, we will not discover this without a certain purity, without a certain discipline. But as I think you can see, this is another rationale for why we're here and what our faith is about. I haven't come to dwell on the jahiliyyah that masquerades as Islam. Really, I've come to address the Ali Jannah, not the Ali Nar, the people of the garden, not the people of the fire. And I've come to speak about the hidden treasure of Islam. What is most essential to what we call Tasawwuf is a higher state of consciousness. Tasawwuf is not a sect among other sects. It's not a sect or religion apart from other religions or Islam. It's a level of awareness other than the habitual ego consciousness which is accepted as normal by the vast majority of people. It was this way from the time of our Prophet, alayhi wasallam. Sufism is another level of experience characterized by presence, huzur. And this presence is the portal to real zikr, taqwa, and iman. So what we mean by Sufism is another level of consciousness and understanding. The rituals and practices of Islam, including ablution, worship, fasting, zakat, and hajj, are all given a different meaning, a deeper meaning. And they are seen as a very balanced and practical spiritual training system, respected their traditional forms, but viewed as a means of communion with the divine. The primary emphasis is on inner sincerity and the lived experience of the divine. Instead of scanning the environment to see who is doing what in the wrong way, we look to ourselves, our motivations, our own subtle forms of idolatry. With this presence, with this huzur, we find a new quality of relationship to the nafs, to the false self. We are no longer contained, limited, and defined by the false self, by the nafs. Whereas before we may have been imprisoned by envy, resentment, or pride, with this presence we have a space outside of those states from which we can at least see them. And through this seeing, they may be transformed. According to Rumi, one of his most beloved hadiths was that a prophet, peace be upon him, said, "There is no salah without huzur, without presence." So salat is not a series of movements. It is a series of movements and intention accompanied by a particular state of consciousness. In the state of presence, we are closer to the core of our being. And from that core, we are capable of a more authentic love. And this is a divine love, not a donkey love, as the Sufis sometimes call it. You could say that Sufism is based on this love and the fruits of this love. The fruits of love are humbleness, forgiveness, gratitude, guilelessness, endurance, generosity, patience. If we keep our minds focused on these qualities, if we shine the light of conscious will through the spectrum of these qualities, of love's qualities, our energy will surely increase through God's grace, and we will gradually radiate more holiness into the world. In Sufism, love encompasses three dimensions. First, love of creation and creatures. Second, love of the prophets, messengers, and saints. Third, love of the divine, love of Allah. Everything else follows from these loves. Our worship, our search for knowledge, our ethics, our spiritual courtesy or adab, our values, our way of life. I am, of course, describing an ideal. All human systems are susceptible to misdirection and corruption. There may sometimes be groups that become authoritarian personality cults. There may be false teachers that take advantage of people's credulity. But many of the criticisms of Sufism by those outside of its process miss the point and are based on misinformation and projection. Sufis are not otherworldly, passive, indulgent slackers and cultists. But they do follow heavenly values and oppose enslavement to the ego's ambitions. Sufis do not worship dead people at graves, but they learn the art of residence with those who were and are near to God. Sufis are not lax in fulfilling religious and moral duties, but they are perhaps most scrupulous in examining their own motivations and inner sincerity. Sufis do not avoid critical thinking or belittle human intellect, but they actively employ the sciences of wisdom to awaken the subtler human faculties. Again, from Rumi, was a great teacher of spiritual perception. Those of you who are interested in pursuing the study of Rumi and what he's really about, a lens through which you can perhaps understand him better is as a teacher of spiritual perception. He believed what the human being primarily is vision. And that increasing our capacity and purity of vision is our way of knowing the divine and knowing our place in the universe. Well, here's an interesting way that he describes what inevitably happens in human institutions. In mainstream religion, it can happen too. In the tariqas, the esoteric paths. He says this: we realize that faith is discernment. Iman is Furqan. After all, the basis of the science of jurisprudence is inspiration. However, when it got mixed up with the ideas, emotions, and the applications of people, that grace, to some extent, disappeared. Now, what resemblance does it bear to the subtlety of revelation? It is like the water that flows from a spring high above a city. See how clear and pure it is? As it enters the city and passes through the gardens, quarters, and houses of the citizenry, so many people bathe their hands and feet and faces and limbs, clothes and carpets in it, and the urine and filth of the quarters and of horses and camels are poured in and mixed with it. See what it is like when it comes out on the other side of town? Even though it is the same water, it will turn dirt into mud. It will slake the thirst of the thirsty, and it will still turn the desert green. Still, it takes a discerning person to comprehend that the purity that water once had has gone, and that unpleasant things have been mixed in with it. Incorruptible water. Surah 47, ayat 15. That is what is necessary. Incorruptible water is that which cleans all the impurities of the world, but which is not infected thereby, but remains as pure and clear as it was, neither breaking down in the stomach nor becoming adulterated or polluted. And that is the water of life. Where there is real gold, there will also be counterfeit coin. The field of Sufism can be exploited by those who are greedy for attention, prestige, and power. Fame, for instance, is not a reliable criterion for spiritual attainment. Self-promotion and implied claims of enlightenment should be viewed as red flags to the discerning seeker. Nevertheless, there does exist a living tradition of inner knowing and of transformation through spiritual experience. Perhaps we might do well to find new ways of talking about the process of human transformation. Recent developments in neuroscience can give us some insights into the effectiveness of Islamic Sufism as a spiritual training system. This is not to say that we require science to validate our methods and our path. In fact, the nuances and qualities known by the spiritual practitioner go far beyond anything so far measurable by science. But science can demonstrate that certain techniques have measurable effects. Experiments show that the brain functioning of mystics is more comprehensive and balanced than the functioning of even highly developed thinkers. And yet these measurements do not take us inside the subjective experience of the human soul when it is in that qualitative realm. And we do not yet have a true science of qualities, but only a science of quantities. So what are the outcomes, the ripened fruits of an authentic Sufi training? First of all, a sense of presence, of huzur, a comprehensive awareness of our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that to a certain extent frees us from the unconscious compulsions of the nafs, our egos. In addition, this wider field of awareness allows us to experience and resonate with a spiritual realm, a plane of divine attributes, which can enrich, mature, and perfect the human soul. By developing a capacity to remember our highest aim, our highest truth, by holding positive qualities in our hearts and minds, and by attuning ourselves to the plane of divine attributes through the Asma'ul Husna, the most beautiful names, the very content of our souls is transformed. Finally, I will add the ripened fruit of an increased capacity for love, divine unconditional love. Mevlana Rumi says, "The greatest love is love with no object, for then you are one with the source of love." Classical Sufism is fundamentally based in the normative practices of Islam, but in Sufism these are understood as a spiritual training system, not as a fear-provoking set of commands and obligations. Abu Hurairah related that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Verily, religion is ease, and whoever overburdens himself in his religion will be overpowered by it. Do not be extremists, but be true, and draw near, and be receptive to goodness, and seek God's help from the beginning of the day to its end, and in your striving through the night." The result of the harmonious application of this methodology is to produce a coherent individual. Coherence includes the balancing functioning of our thinking, feeling, bodily awareness, empathy, and transcendent awareness. And this coherence is the result of developing a strong, awakened, and purified heart. When they asked our Prophet, peace be upon him, "What is sin?" he said, "Sin is what troubles your heart. Leave it." Everything depends on the state of the heart. And what we mean by Tasawwuf is the education and purification of the heart. So in conclusion, I would like to say that Sufism, in its comprehensive form, is not a purely individual activity, nor a mere intellectual preference, but a commitment, a relationship to a sacred path under the guidance of someone who has matured on such a path, and in the companies of others like yourself who are in the process of transformation from immaturity to maturity, from heedlessness to God consciousness, from false independence to servanthood. Spirituality is not primarily a tutorial situation, because the individual human ego is not the ultimate unit of reality. In other words, Sufism is a path toward divine communion in synergy with the community of people who share common values and a common vibration. It is a relational spirituality. As Rumi says, if you want to know love, become we. The goal is, after all, Tawheed, the experience of oneness. For wheresoever you look is the face of God. closing, the words of Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi. He says, "The sciences of wisdom are God's armies, by which he strengthens the spirits of the initiates and purifies their knowledge from the adulteration of ignorance, purifies their justice from the adulteration of bias, their generosity from the adulteration of ostentation, their forbearance from the adulteration of foolishness, and brings near to them whatever was far from them in their understanding of the hereafter, and makes easy to them whatever was hard for them in respect of obedience and energetic endeavor." Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Shaikh Kabir, for a very thoughtful, very deep talk. We'll open it up now to questions, but I wanted to perhaps kick off in terms of the questions with, as I understand, one of the understandings of Sufism or Islam actually is that God provides revelation to man, man then corrupts, then God then sends another messenger down, man corrupts, and God sends a prophet out, and that cycle continues. Now obviously prophethood has now come to an end. So how do you see that cycle being broken?
I think the Quran is an extraordinary critique of all the ways in which religion degenerates from a certain point of view. It's given us the answers, and it is a critique of the way man-made religion slowly replaces divinely revealed religion. So one answer, part of the answer is that the wisdom is in the Quran. Another aspect of the answer, however, is that, speaking from my own experience, I don't think I would have understood much of these things if I hadn't met people who were, in a sense, the living Quran themselves. So we depend on those people who have matured, those people who are near to God, and that's the meaning of wali, those who are near. That these people are examples for us, and through their very state transmit to us the experience that is at the heart of the revelation. Once a prophet was asked, "Who are the best people?" He said, and there are different answers, there are different hadith, but one of the most beautiful ones is, "The best human beings are those who, when seen, remind you of God." So we need those who embody this reality.
Open it up to questions.
You talk very much about intent, and I suppose Nia is the fluorescence of everything that we do. And you also talked about a person being able to transform, going through a process of transformation. Do you think that in order for each human being to transform, they must have to experience the nafs to recognize it within themselves, and not just in others, to be able to transform, to overcome it?
So I'll repeat the question. To what extent do we need to experience our own nafs in order to undergo this transformation that we're talking about? The approach on one level is just to remind people, to scare them perhaps, to preach to them. This hasn't proved very effective, it seems. But there's a capacity within the human being that allows us to get some distance on our own nafs and sustain that perspective on the false self. And And I'll give some very practical examples of what I'm talking. Let's say that in essence what you are is a being that's been invited here by the divine into this beautiful world. And the divine just wants you to be appreciative and grateful and to realize what a gift this is and to remember him, report to him. But however, we all, the ego in all of us, wants attention, it doesn't want to be ignored, wants approval, it doesn't want to be disapproved, wants to be in control, not have things out of control, people doing things we don't like. And these are all the games, these are examples of the games that the nafs plays. The fundamental game is that I should be forever undisturbed, and anything that disturbs me or becomes difficult in my life is bad. And we get drawn into all those complexes and all those strategies. The strategies include when I face difficulty or things I don't like or people are not behaving the way I want them to behave. We complain, or we get angry, or we withdraw, or we try to control them. So these are rather, as I'm pointing them out, we will all admit that we all have been guilty of these strategies, of these complaints. This is all us. But what will allow us to see this continually? What will help us to give up the stories we tell about our experience? We write these stories of dissatisfaction, stories of resentment, or stories of, oh, poor me, or stories that I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough. We need and we can, through real spiritual practice, find in ourselves a state of being, a state of well-being that is independent of circumstance. This is the fundamental possibility. And this is faith, this is true faith, this is trust. To know that no matter what happens, we live in a meaningful, purposeful universe, that we are recipients of the divine grace and beneficence, and that everything in our life has been arranged to educate our souls and to remind us of the beauty, generosity, and intelligent nurturance of the divine. When you're in that state, these ego games are a little bit easier to let go of. You see how foolish they are and how they don't bring you what you want anyway. Like how is anger working for you, for instance? How well is resentment? What's that doing for us? But very often we don't even recognize that we're in a state of resentment. People can live their whole lives in that deepening state of resenting their partner, resenting their job, resenting life or God himself. We need consciousness. That's why we need a higher level presence.
Okay, next question. First of all, thank you very much for your talk. Secondly, I just noticed in the publicity for this event, and also during the talk, that you've used certain terminology which kind of echoes modern psychotherapy, and things like mindfulness, sense of self. And I'm sort of very marginally aware that in the recent past, psychotherapy is beginning to explore the awareness of the self, because this helps people to escape the traps of the mouth.
Yes.
And up to now, they've drawn very much on the teachings of classical Buddhism and even practices of Buddhism, like meditation. And I just wondered whether in your experience you'd had any interaction with modern psychotherapy, and whether to any extent they've taken on board the practices of Sufism,
Yes.
Which again are involved with invocation and remembrance and transforming yourself.
Thank you. So the question is about the relationship of modern psychotherapy to Sufism and Sufism to modern psychotherapy, and the language that we sometimes use, or it may seem that I use, which may seem to be a bit of a language that at least refers to some of these psychological terms. Well, there's so much that I could say about this. I think there's a big difference between psychology and spirituality. And the boundary for me, first of all, is psychology is primarily concerned with me. I mean, I experience this as a, shall we say, as a teacher in the spiritual field. That some people come and their total concern is about themselves and their own story. But then there's a, what do you call it? There's a shift. There's a point where, and it's a beautiful point in the journey, when you realize it's really not about you and your story, it's all about God. And that's when we enter the realm of spirituality. We find that it's a lot more interesting than my story. But at the same time, we realize that my story, every detail of it, has significance, that the rahmah, the mercy of the divine, is in every detail of the human story. That's the miraculous. It may seem like I'm diverging a little bit, but I'm going to get back to this relationship of psychological language to, let's say, the Quranic vocabulary. I believe we need a new way of talking about these things that takes account of some modern, shall we say, awarenesses brought by psychology. At the same time, we would never abandon the essential vocabulary of the Quran, which is our key and the most profound terminology. But there are new ways of talking about this truth, the truth revealed in the Quran, without losing, when I say a new way of talking about it, I've written a whole book on the Quranic vocabulary, so I will stand by it in our teaching. We emphasize it. But we also have a new way of talking about these things. For instance, I said in this talk here that the result of spiritual development is a more coherent individual. Now, where's that word from? It's actually from science. And yet it applies beautifully to our situation. That a strong heart brings coherence to the human being. And to be, in a state of less incoherence, dispersion, is an unhappy state. So, Tawheed is the Quranic term. Tawheed is translated all the way from monotheism, which is very limited understanding of Tawheed, to coherence, which is the unity of existence, the oneness of existence, to another way of understanding it, which is to live on every level of your being simultaneously. So we have ways of talking about the essential truths revealed in the Quran, which for us are the Quran is a beautiful vehicle for the understanding and expression of the highest levels of human experience. It has served the greatest mystics of humanity very, very well. But we also are people of this time, and the level of our cultural development is changing. And therefore, we also need to sometimes talk in a new way about these things.
Just in terms, I'm talking from personal experience as well. I know Sufism can sometimes provide people with something so Sufism, I know from my own personal experience, can help people who suffer or go through a crisis of faith, can provide a pill balance or a means to go back to Islam. But in terms of finding a Sufi teacher or guidance, etc., my personal experience of Sufi silsilas has been that they're quite exclusive and they're not as open to people who aren't born into a Sufi family or Sufi, don't have that kind of relationship with Sufism from a young age. And my question really is, how can Sufism become more accessible to people who aren't actually brought up with that exposure?
So the question is, some examples of tariqah seem exclusive and are easier for people who have been born into the tradition or the culture to enter. And how can we have a form of Sufism that is more accessible to people? Well, this is a very good question, and you're pointing to a significant need. Maybe we need what I sometimes call Sufism 3.0, an upgrade And we're working on it. Truly, we're working on that. And some of the issues we have to face include, is it possible to create a format in which sincere people can come together, even when there isn't necessarily someone who's matured on the path? In other words, there may not be a sheikh available. Can we create a format that would allow people to come together harmoniously, without any individual egos taking over, and to experience the beauties, the energy, the adab of Sufi culture, and to allow their hearts and consciousness to develop? You know, I believe there are some possibilities along those lines. It is a kind of a different approach to Sufism, which I will admit, in many forms, can be quite authoritarian. I didn't meet that in my own experience. I've seen it. I've seen plenty of it. I didn't meet that from my own teachers. My own teachers were true servants. They were humble. They were humbler than I could be. And so that's what I hope to learn from them. They were servants, and they were friends. But you point to something very good, because many of the forms of Sufism available to us are culturally limited. I mean, some of them are very Turkish, some are very Persian, some are very Arabic. And why can't we have a form of Sufism that is authentic Sufism, true to its, DNA, you might say, the true DNA that traces all the way back to the Quran and our Prophet, and yet is at home in this culture without compromising with it. So I recognize the need.
Yeah.
What you're saying is that I think it really is cultural context.
If you could speak a little bit louder, this is
Yeah.
probably to hear.
I think Sufism being to foreign lands, as it were, it has done right from its birth. So, I mean, when it went from, main Middle East to the Indian subcontinent, to Central Asian republics, and it went all the way to East Europe countries, it didn't have this similar experience of having to adapt itself to the cultural lingo, of the new context that it found itself in. So I don't think it's a new experience. It's an ongoing experience from different years. And it then seemed, as you said, just said, Turkish, Indian, whatever, what happened, that it actually adapted itself to the local. But when it came with its DNA, and it just found a way of expressing itself in whichever culture it was. So I think it's sort of happened in the past, and it's a continuing process, and it's happening now. I mean, if you look at Eastern Europe, for example, they're just, indigenous to European people. But there are some tariqas in Bosnia, Albania, modern Greece, and things like that, which are very much in line with their culture.
Yes, exactly right. This has been going on for many centuries and may continue. It's a living tradition. Thank you.
Sheikh, we're so privileged to have such a realistic picture of the situation of Islam. And please forgive me, because I'm going to talk or ask you something which is a sensitive area, I'm going to say a couple of words first. The Sufi teaching talks about a person's journey to reform the self. And they talk about states and stations. And a beautiful book by Shaykh Abdullah Hariri on the journey of the self. Also, Shaykh Abdul Qadir Gailani says, it's not, he talks about people as the common man. In Arabic, it's not derogatory, or the lay person. And then al-khawas, which is special people, and then khawas and awliya. So every different single person is at a different point in that journey. in this life. So according to a person's position on that journey, you know, so some people complain that X comes to the masjid only on Fridays. And I say, alhamdulillah, there are people who don't have, they are born Muslims, they don't follow Islam, they don't believe in Islam, and we are different people, different stages. Really the question I would like to ask you and have your opinion, because it really pains me. When I go to the masjid, I hear things which is said, oh, the Sufis do this, they're all, in English, we can say heretics. And then, to me, you know, whatever a person is doing, it's his affair. I mean, obviously, if they come for advice, then, but not to keep going on. What is your opinion about there is room for everything that is going on? Alhamdulillah, in this country, when I look around, there are so many masjids. When I see little children coming into our little masjid, learning Quran, I say, alhamdulillah, you know, they are being, I agree, being put in a framework, and it applies to our, you know, other brothers and sisters of other religions and beliefs. So don't you think there is room for both, and that the person would come out of that, if you like, the traditional structure when they are ready into the spiritual side?
So the question is, there are different understandings of Islam. Some people in a more conservative mentality, and they may be judging other mentalities, and perhaps the people who are more less conservative mentality are judging the conservative mentality. Is there room for all? Well, obviously there's room for all because they're here. And
Just about.
it's, you know, it must be the divine will. And, you know, Allah sometimes even causes our going astray to be the means by which we find our way home. So, and our Prophet, peace be upon him, said, you will not enter paradise if there's one atom of pride in your heart. And the person said, well, but I like fine clothes, I like to look good. He said, well, that's not what I mean by pride. I mean pride is despising others. So, you know, for us, the spiritual point of view is not to judge people, not to blame people. But to me, that does not mean not to educate people. It does not mean to be complacent about the poverty of ideas we see in our society or in a particular religion. You know, I think we need to, I think what people are really lacking very often is ideas that would enrich their souls, because they've never been exposed to those ideas. They're day by day told, you know, well, those people are kafirs, and we have the one true religion. It forms a mentality, it forms a way of thinking. They're not even to blame for that. So it's not a matter of blame, it never is a matter of blaming anyone, but we are seekers after truth, and we want to support and share the highest truth.